He never wanted to get married. Not really. Jackson Vale wasn't the type, too rich, too powerful, too busy dismantling empires and building new ones out of glass, steel, and silent compliance. Love was a liability and marriage was a negotiation. But then, one photograph changed everything. It was meant to be a harmless, drunken night, at least by billionaire standards. But the tabloids didn't see harmless. They saw Indy Monroe straddling him on a grand piano in Monaco, her middle, finger aimed at the camera, black lipstick smudged like war paint, and Jackson laughing for the first time in months. The story exploded. Playboy billionaire caught with anarchist artist in scandalous affair. He could have spun it, sure. Blamed Photoshop, blamed alcohol, blamed boredom. But Indy, she didn't spin. She posted the picture herself and captioned, "It. Your king is now mine, peasants. Corporate sponsors threatened to walk. Stockholders panicked. His board demanded damage control." So Jackson did what he always did, controlled the damage. He showed up at her rundown warehouse loft at 2 in the morning with a contract and a ring. No roses, no kneeling, just ice in his veins and a calm, brutal offer. "Marry me for 12 and months. I fix my public image. You get full funding for your gallery, international shows, and your name in the papers for all the right reasons. You walk away richer. I walk away cleaner." Indy Monroe tilted her head and blinked once, slowly. She wore a paint-stained Slipknot shirt, had half a cigarette behind one ear, and the fire of 100 revolutions in her eyes. "You're adorable," she muttered, "thinking you can buy your way into owning me." "I'm not buying you. I'm partnering with you. You want a business partner who screams about dismantling capitalism while spray-painting alley walls. I want a woman the world can't stop watching." Indy stood, barefoot on concrete, and got nose to nose. With him, fine, but I get final say on the wedding theme. He blinked. "Excuse me? I want taxidermy swans and a black cake filled with glitter. No prenup unless it's in iambic pentameter. And I pick the music. If I hear one Ed Sheeran song, I set your mansion on fire." He didn't laugh. He never laughed. But his lips twitched. "Deal." She signed the contract with a marker, neon pink. Now here's the thing. Maybe they both thought they were in control. Jackson with his spreadsheets and stone-cold smirk. Indy with her chaos and claws. But fate doesn't really care for contracts, especially not ones written in neon pink. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where this wild little story finds you. It began the next day. Jackson Vale, billionaire ice prince of Manhattan, held a press conference with Indy by his side. She wore combat boots and a wedding dress from the thrift store. He wore Armani and regret. "We are pleased to announce our engagement," he said smoothly, while she winked at the cameras and blew a kiss to a protester, holding a sign that read, "Save Indy from the suit." The world exploded again. Their faces were everywhere, covers, TikToks, headlines, memes. Indy was a storm in heels. Jackson was her unwilling umbrella. But as they walked away from the cameras that day, she slid her hand into his. "Smile, billionaire," she whispered. "This is going to be one hell of a ride." He should have known then. Should have read the warning in her smile, the glint in her eyes. But he was too busy calculating risk, managing outcomes. He didn't believe in surprises. That's the thing about people like Jackson Vale. They don't expect the one thing that's always waiting to strike. A story. One with teeth. And Indy. She didn't just bring claws to the marriage. She brought the match. Moving her into the penthouse was like unleashing a hurricane in a jewelry box. Jackson Vale's home was the epitome of cold perfection. Walls of glass, floors polished like mirrors, minimalism executed with military precision. Every object had a place. Every surface gleamed with the quiet arrogance of wealth. Then Indy Monroe showed up with 3 duffel bags, a stack of graffiti-covered canvases, and a rescued one-eyed cat named Vandal. He watched her dump her boots at the front door and throw herself onto his 1,000-thread-count linen couch with a satisfied sigh. "Nice place," she said. "Feels like an operating room with better views. I designed it to be uncluttered." She snorted. "You mean sterile? You should have just moved into an actual freezer." He ignored her, but later, when she wasn't looking, he stared at her boots. Mud on the soles, one lace broken, a red paint streak down the side, and somehow the living room felt alive. Not better, not worse, just different. Their first dinner as an engaged couple was silent. The chef prepared something exquisite and absurd, truffle foam on seared bass with edible flowers. Indy stared at it, then pushed the plate away. "Do you ever eat anything that had a face?" "Would you prefer I kill it myself?" Jackson replied coolly. She grinned. "I'd prefer we go get tacos. We're in a $25 million building in Tribeca, and yet you're starving for something real." She was always saying things like that, sharp, poetic, too honest. It got under his skin. She got under his skin. That night, he watched her from the second floor as she danced barefoot across the living room, music blaring from her phone. She'd turned his pristine space into a war zone. Paint splatters on his white marble counters, a hoodie hanging off a priceless statue, her laughter echoing off glass like it belonged there. He told himself he hated it, but he didn't ask her to. Stop. The first week passed in a tug-of-war neither of them acknowledged. She refused to attend his curated events. He refused to comment on her late-night art sprees. Every boundary was a line drawn, then stepped over, then redrawn again. Until the morning she hung a painting in the dining room. He walked in mid-call with his CFO and stopped cold. It was a portrait, half abstract, wild brushstrokes, all teeth and shadows, but unmistakably him. Not polished, not regal, raw. A man staring into the dark, not quite sure if he was meant to survive it. She didn't ask permission, she just waited. Jackson ended the call. "That's not flattering." "It's not supposed to be," she said softly. "It's you, the version no one ever sees." He didn't respond, didn't know how, just walked away like he always did. But the painting stayed. Day by day, the lines between them blurred. Her scent lingered in his hallway. His wristwatch sat on her nightstand. They lived like strangers playing house. But some mornings, she left coffee beside his keyboard. And some nights, he found her asleep on his couch, curled into the corner, like she owned it. She never said good night, he never said good morning, but their silence was beginning to hum. Then came the dinner with his board. It was supposed to be simple, appear united, reassure investors, smile for the cameras. But Indy didn't do simple. She wore a leather corset and a jacket painted with the words, "Eat the rich." When the CFO's wife asked if she'd be taking Jackson's name, Indy took a sip of wine and said, "Only if he begs, barefoot under a full moon." Jackson choked on his scotch. She was chaos, a walking scandal, and for the first time in his meticulously calculated life, he was addicted to it. Late that night, he found her on the rooftop, legs swinging over the edge. City lights reflected. In her eyes like constellations. "I know what you're thinking," she said without turning, "that this was a mistake." He stood beside her, quiet. "But you needed someone you couldn't control, didn't you? You needed to burn." He didn't answer. She looked at him then, truly looked. "I'm not afraid of you, Jackson Vale. I never was." And that scared him more than anything. He left without a word. But that night, her painting wasn't the only one hanging in the dining room. His fingers had added something to the canvas. Just a single stroke, red, across the heart, a mark of entry or surrender. The world loved a spectacle, and Jackson Vale had just handed them one on a diamond-plated platter. Engagement photos leaked, some polished, others stolen by long-lensed paparazzi, hiding in hedges. Jackson in sharp, tailored black, Indy in a sheer crimson dress, a cigarette dangling from her lips like punctuation. One shot in particular went viral, her flipping off the camera with her ring finger. Hashtag spiraled. I'm Vale and the Vandal, Beauty and the Beast. Modern love or marketing stunt. Behind closed doors, the air thickened. Interviews were booked, invitations sent. Stylists buzzed around her like bees, trying to sandpaper her edges. One even brought her a beige blouse and suggested she tone it down. Indy laughed so hard she cried. Jackson walked in, saw her doubled over and asked, "What now?" She held up the blouse like roadkill. "They want me to look relatable." He stared at the stylist. "Leave now." That moment earned him a look, curious, almost grateful. She didn't say thank you. She didn't need to. But for every gesture, like that, there were 10 more that pulled them apart. They barely spoke at home now. He buried himself in meetings, spreadsheets, merger deals. She painted late into the night, earphones in, heart elsewhere. They were orbiting each other, close but unreachable. Then one morning, Jackson walked into her studio space and saw something that stopped him cold. A canvas taller than him sat unfinished. Abstract, sure. Wild, definitely. But it wasn't random. There were figures hidden inside the mess, blurred faces, whispering outlines, and always one man, him, but not as he appeared in real life, not the public version. He looked haunted, childlike, lost. And then he noticed the letters. Scattered across a pinned-up wall beside the canvas were dozens of unsent letters, some typed, most handwritten, all addressed to someone named Leo. He reached for one, paused, didn't read it, but Indy turned the corner just then, saw him, and froze. "You read them?" she asked, voice flat. "No." "Good. Don't." Her tone didn't rise, but it tightened like a door closing. "Who's Leo?" he asked. She didn't blink. "No one anymore." He didn't press, but the letters didn't leave his mind. Neither did the way her hands shook when she reached for the nearest one and shoved it into a drawer, slamming it shut. Secrets. They both had them. But hers bled through paint. That week, she insisted on joining him at a formal press gala, hosted by one of his biggest partners. She walked in wearing a mesh dress over lingerie and Doc Martens, red eyeliner winged like daggers. Every camera turned. Jackson offered his arm. She didn't take it, just smirked and walked 2 steps ahead, the living embodiment of defiance. Inside, the whispers swirled. She took a flute of champagne and wandered the room like she owned it. Artists whispered, behind their hands. Executives laughed nervously. Someone called her a circus act under their breath. She turned, walked right up to Jackson and said loudly, "How much of your soul did you have to sell to get this chandelier?" The room froze. He could have shut it down, could have brushed it off with a joke, but he didn't. He looked around, then straight at her and said, "Probably the last piece I had." For a moment something flickered across her face. Surprise, or maybe understanding. Later, in the town car, silence thick between them, she finally muttered, "You didn't have to say that." Why not? It was true. She turned to the window, but he saw it, her hand curled slightly like she wanted to reach for his. She didn't. Neither did he. But that night, she added a new painting to her wall. It wasn't of him. Not exactly. It was of 2 figures, back to back, surrounded by mirrors, one cracked, one whole, neither turning around. Jackson stared at it for a long time. The next morning, he made a call to cancel all public appearances for the rest of the week. Told the board he was handling internal affairs. Then he stood at the doorway to her studio and said, "Let's go somewhere." She looked up, suspicious. "Where?" "Anywhere you can't paint, and I can't be followed." Her smile was slow, wicked, and curious. "You're serious?" "I am." She stood, wiped her hands on her shirt, and tossed her phone on the couch. Then pack a toothbrush, billionaire, and bring nothing else. It was the first time they left the city together, the first time their war paused, but not the last time it would rage. They ended up in a coastal town that didn't know their names. Indy picked it from a map, blindfolded, finger-spinning, eyes closed. "Here," she declared, pointing to a speck on the Oregon coast. "No paparazzi, no parties, just fog, salt, and silence." Jackson booked the house within minutes. No questions. The house was small. Too small for a man used to penthouse space and automated everything. The floors creaked, the heating groaned. But the windows opened wide to crashing waves, and for once, nothing about their presence felt performative. She went barefoot from the moment they arrived. He wore linen for the first time in his life. They didn't talk about the wedding, or the headlines, or the weight of what waited for them back home. For 48 hours they existed in a fragile bubble of peace. She cooked. He chopped vegetables badly. She laughed at him. He let her. The first real conversation happened over coffee as the ocean misted the windows. "Did you ever want to be something else?" she asked suddenly, curled in a blanket, legs tucked under her. Jackson sipped his espresso. "Something besides what?" "Besides the corporate god, the media's wet dream, the suit." He looked out the window. "I used to want to be a pilot," she blinked. "Seriously?" he nodded. "I was obsessed with sky charts as a kid, memorized runway numbers, built model planes. My father called it a waste of time." "So you became a billionaire just to prove him wrong." He glanced at her. "Don't we all become something to survive someone?" She didn't reply for a long moment. Then, "I wanted to be a dancer, classical ballet, point shoes, Swan Lake, the whole thing." "What happened?" She looked down. "Life." Neither of them said much after that, but something settled between them. Not peace, not yet, but the beginning of a truce. That night, she dared him into the water. The ocean was freezing, the kind that gnawed at bones. But she ran into it like she was weightless, a streak of ink and starlight beneath the moon. He followed. They screamed, laughed, swore as the waves knocked them down. When he grabbed her wrist to stop her from slipping on a rock, she grabbed his face and kissed him. It wasn't soft, it wasn't tender, it was hunger, teeth, salt, and unsaid truths crashing into one combustible moment. Back at the house, dripping wet and breathless, she pulled his shirt over his head. He let her. She unbuckled his belt. He didn't stop her. But then, as her fingers brushed his scars, faint lines on his side, silvered over time, she paused. "You've been hurt," she murmured. His voice was low. "Haven't you?" She pulled back, not fully, just enough. He didn't push, didn't ask, just wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and sat beside her until sleep took them both. On the couch. The next morning she painted on the porch. He made her breakfast, badly again. And when she stood to look at the ocean, hair tangled, eyes closed, arms stretched wide, Jackson Vale realized something terrifying. He didn't want her for just a year. He wanted her in his quietest moments. He wanted her when the cameras weren't watching. That night, she sat on the roof with him, bottle of wine in hand. "You think we'll make it to the wedding?" she asked. He took the bottle, drank straight from it. "If we don't kill each other first." She smiled. "We're not that lucky." There was a pause. Then, very softly, she added, "You still haven't asked me anything real." "Like what?" "Like why I agreed to this at all." He looked at her. Moonlight caught on her cheekbone, carved her into something mythic. "Because you wanted to be seen." She tilted her head. "Wrong. I wanted to matter. There's a difference." He didn't respond because she was right, and that somehow was the most intimate thing she'd ever told him. By the time they packed to leave, the air between them had changed. They weren't friends, not lovers, not yet, but something had shifted. The war was no longer about control. Now it was about surrender, and both of them were starting to wonder what it would cost to lose. Back in the city, the fairy tale facade had grown teeth. Every headline was louder, every camera lens more aggressive. The world was salivating over the chaos of it all. The broken prince and the wildfire girl pretending to play house. Only now, the pretending felt thinner, more fragile. Like if they breathed too hard, it would all come crashing down. They returned separately, his driver picking him up from the airport. She took a rideshare with her headphones in and eyes closed. It was easier than admitting they didn't know how to bring the quiet of the coast back with them. The penthouse welcomed them like a museum waking from sleep, cold, gleaming, too clean. The next morning, the wedding planner arrived. Silk swatches, cake samples, venue projections glowing on tablets. Jackson sat through it like a hostage. Indy, however, played it cool, leaning back, legs up on the coffee table, sipping coffee from a chipped mug. "This is all so predictable," she said after the fifth floral option. The planner blinked. "Excuse me? I mean, if I'm gonna marry a billionaire, can't we at least make it weird?" Jackson looked up. "What exactly does weird mean in this case?" She grinned. "Taxidermy bouquets? An anti-vow instead of a vow. No aisle, just fog machines and confetti. Or better yet, get married on a rooftop with nobody but us and a bottle of tequila." The planner paled. Jackson didn't laugh, but he didn't dismiss her either. Later, that night, as they stood on the balcony overlooking the city, he asked quietly, "You meant all of that, didn't you?" She shrugged. "I don't like pretending to be something I'm not." He nodded. "Neither do I." She glanced at him. "Then why do you?" He didn't have an answer, so he said nothing. Days passed. The pressure mounted. Photo shoots, contracts. Her face appeared on gossip columns, sometimes without her knowledge, sometimes because she'd said something incendiary. She wore it all like armor. But some nights he noticed how long she lingered in front of the mirror, how still she became when she thought he wasn't watching. One night she said, "I hate being a symbol." "You're not," he said too quickly. She turned to him. "Then what am Jackson? The girl who tamed the beast, the rebel with a rich man's leash. You're you." That stopped her for a breath. Then she whispered, "You don't even know what that means." He didn't argue, because she was right. Then came the charity gala, a mandatory appearance packed with society's sharpest smiles and most polished claws. She wore black velvet, cut low with combat boots underneath. The contrast was intentional, so was the blood-red lipstick. People stared, whispered. He held her hand tighter than usual, but halfway through the evening, she disappeared. Jackson bound her outside, tucked into a dark corner, chain smoking and muttering curses under her breath. "They treat me like a circus act," she said when he approached. "Like I'm part of your brand package. Like my only value is how unexpected I am." "You're not a prop." "No," she said, flicking ash to the concrete, "but I'm not a person to them either. I'm a headline." He exhaled, pulled the cigarette from her fingers and dropped it. "Then let's disappear." She blinked. "What?" "Right now. Just you and me. No press, no cameras, no assistants." "You're serious?" "Dead." She stared at him, searching for the angle. But there wasn't one. Only him, tired, raw, and something dangerously close to sincere. "All right," she said. "Let's see if you survive without your schedule." They drove until the skyline vanished, found a rundown motel on the edge of the Hudson and paid in cash. The bed creaked, the wallpaper peeled, but the silence was real and the air wasn't pretending to be expensive. They lay on the bed, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling. "Ever wonder what it'd be like if we'd met without the contract?" she asked. "All the time. Do you think we'd still hate each other?" He turned his head toward her. "I don't hate you, Indy." She held his gaze. "You're just afraid to love me." The silence after that wasn't cold. It was thick, heavy, real. That night, they didn't sleep together, but they shared a bed. And it was the first time. Neither of them woke up alone. The wedding was 2 weeks away. The city hummed louder than ever. Photographers lurked behind tinted vans. Drones buzzed above the penthouse like mosquitoes with lenses. Jackson's legal team kept scrubbing leaks, but it was like trying to hold back the tide with bare hands. Every move they made became a headline. Every word they said twisted into clickbait. Indy didn't seem to care. She wore ripped shirts and combat boots to dress fittings, told the caterers she was allergic to blandness. When asked about flower arrangements, she deadpanned, "Weeds, preferably the kind that bite back." But Jackson could see it. Under the bravado, something restless tugging at the corners of her. The pressure wasn't just hers. His board had started to whisper, investors asking behind closed doors whether the publicity stunt was veering off brand. One particularly bold executive emailed him directly, "Maybe reconsider the match, cut losses before it escalates." Jackson deleted it without replying. Then came the rehearsal dinner. A private affair, just a small circle, mostly for show. No cameras, no press, just family, associates, and two people trying not to drown in the undertow of expectations. Indy stood on the rooftop in a black slip dress, wind whipping through her hair, cigarette held like a secret between her fingers. Jackson watched from across the room. She was alone. Not because she didn't have options, people gravitated toward her like moths to flame, but because she knew better than to let any of them close. His father arrived late. Of course he did. Powerfully built, sharp-eyed and colder than marble. Malcolm Vale hadn't attended anything since Jackson's first board seat appointment, and now here he was, sweeping in like a spectre. His eyes scanned the crowd, landed on Indy, and stayed there. "She's not what I expected," he said without preamble. "She rarely is," Jackson replied. Malcolm sipped his drink. "You're risking everything." "I know." There was a beat of silence. "You love her." "I don't know yet," Jackson said honestly, "but I know she sees me, the part nobody else bothers to look at." His father nodded just once. Not approval, not support, just acknowledgement. Indy noticed the exchange. Later, she cornered Jackson by the elevator. "That was your father." "Yeah, he didn't shake my hand." "He doesn't shake anyone's hand unless they make him money." She raised an eyebrow. "Am I not profitable enough for him?" "You're unpredictable," he said, "which makes you dangerous." She grinned. "Good, but the grin didn't last. Because that night, after the guests left, she found something in his office. A folder, marked confidential. She hadn't meant to snoop, but the door had been ajar. Her name was on the tab, inside a prenup, drafted before they'd even met. Nothing unusual, standard billionaire practice, but stapled to the back was a psychological report. Her psychological report, an assessment, a risk evaluation. She read the first line aloud to herself. "Subject displays signs of oppositional, defiant tendencies, potential for erratic emotional behavior." Her hands trembled. She didn't remember consenting to this. Didn't remember giving anyone access to her past therapy records. Didn't need to finish reading it to feel the betrayal bloom in her chest like a bruise. She didn't confront him right away. She couldn't. She sat on the rooftop instead, knees pulled to her chest, the folder clutched like it might explode. When Jackson finally found her, he knew. The second he saw her face, he knew. "You read it." Her voice was small, flat. "You had me evaluated like a threat." It wasn't like that. She stood. "Then what was it like, Jackson? A checklist? A way to make sure the crazy artist wouldn't ruin your empire?" "I didn't authorize that report." "My legal team." "Your team doesn't do anything without your permission." He didn't speak because she was right. "I trusted you," she said, quieter now. "Not with everything. Not yet. But with enough. I never meant to invade." "You did. And you didn't even tell me." "I was trying to protect..." "Who? Me?" or your brand? The wind ripped through the silence. She dropped the folder at his feet, pages scattered like feathers from a wound. Forget the wedding, she whispered. I'll honor the contract. But after the year's up, we're done. Then she walked inside and shut the door behind her. Jackson didn't follow. He stayed on the rooftop long after the city went quiet, papers curling at his feet, a hole yawning open where something like love had almost started to grow. The silence that followed felt more dangerous than any fight. Indy didn't move out, didn't slam doors, didn't set fire to his suits or call the tabloids. She simply vanished into her own world, moved through the penthouse like a ghost with headphones. She painted until sunrise, barely slept, spoke only when necessary. Jackson tried to talk once, just once. Came to her with tired eyes and no defenses. A quiet, "Can we talk?" hanging between them. She didn't even look at him, just said, "The time for honesty passed, when you let strangers dissect my past without telling me." Then she turned up the music and kept painting, and so the days fell into a rhythm of avoidance. Outwardly, everything remained on track. Dress fittings continued, the venue was finalized, guests confirmed. Indy attended it all like she was haunting her own life. She smiled for cameras, held Jackson's hand in public, even threw in the occasional kiss for the tabloids. But behind closed doors, she didn't touch him, didn't sleep in his bed, didn't let him back into the space they'd almost built. Together, it drove him insane in ways he didn't know how to articulate. He wasn't used to being shut out, not like this, not by her. At a board meeting, he snapped at an analyst. Something about quarterly projections, it didn't matter. What mattered was that his head wasn't in the room, and everyone knew it. "You're distracted," his COO said afterward. "I'm fine," he replied. She raised an eyebrow. "You haven't been fine since the engagement went viral." He left without answering. Back at the penthouse, he found Indy curled on the balcony couch, wrapped in an old hoodie that didn't belong to her. A paint smudge on her cheek, bare feet, propped on the railing. He stood in the doorway watching her for a long moment. "I read the whole report," she said, without looking at him. His chest tightened. "You weren't supposed to." She laughed, dry, bitter. "Isn't that always the line? You weren't supposed to see the thing that tells the truth." "I didn't mean for that to happen, but it did," she said. "And you didn't stop it, which means on some level you wanted to know what the world thought I was, instead of just asking me who I am." He stepped outside, slowly. "Then tell me now." "Why? So you can put it in another folder?" "No. So I can finally listen." She turned then, really turned. Her face was all sharp angles and exhaustion, but her eyes, God, her eyes, were fire. "I was 16 when I got diagnosed. Anxiety, mood disorders. Some therapist said I was volatile but brilliant. I took that like a badge, like maybe if I was hard to handle, at least I'd be unforgettable." He didn't interrupt, didn't blink. "I've been in and out of therapy for years. Meds, no meds, journals full of words I'd never say aloud. And yeah, I get defensive. Yeah, I blow up, but I've worked damn hard to be someone I can stand to look at in the mirror." Her voice broke then, just slightly. "And I was starting to believe I deserved something good, something not built on surveillance and suspicion." He moved to sit beside her. "You do?" She shook her head. He shook her head. "You don't get to decide that." A long silence stretched between them. Then softly he asked, "Why didn't you leave?" "I wanted to, but..." She looked away. "Because I think part of me still wants to believe you're different." His throat closed. "Indy, I don't need you to fix anything, Jackson. I just need you to own it." He nodded slowly. "I failed you. I was scared that if I trusted what I felt, I'd lose control." She exhaled. "I don't want your control. I want your truth." And there it was, the most terrifying thing they'd ever said to each other. That night, she didn't return to her room. She crawled into his bed wordlessly, curled against his chest like a question mark waiting for an answer. He held her like he'd never known how much he needed to. No sex, no declarations, just silence that didn't hurt. A few nights later, she came to him again, this time with something in her hand. A letter. "My wedding gift," she said. "You can't open it until after the ceremony." He took it, cautious. "Is it going to explode?" She smirked. Emotionally, maybe. He tucked it into his drawer. "You still want to go through with it?" She met his eyes. "Yeah, but not because of the contract." "Why then?" "Because we already lit the match," she said. "Might as well see if we burn or rise." The wedding day arrived beneath a sky too blue to feel real. Indy woke early, not because she wanted to, her body just knew. Sleep had become something elusive lately, stretched thin between nerves and memories. She stared at the ceiling for a while, then rolled over to find Jackson's side of the bed empty, already cold. She found him on the rooftop. Black t-shirt, hair messy from wind, coffee in hand, staring down at the miniature world below. He looked more like a man about to jump than a groom. "Cold feet?" she asked, stepping up beside him. He didn't answer right away, just handed her the coffee, and she took a sip without asking. "I keep thinking about how we got here," he said. "How none of it started with love, and yet, she echoed. They didn't say much after that. Words weren't necessary. There was something reverent in the quiet, like they both knew they were standing on the edge of something. Neither of them could fully understand. Not yet. The venue wasn't a cathedral or a ballroom. It was a rooftop, one she'd picked. Concrete and rusted rails, graffiti on the back wall, string lights strung up like a last-minute afterthought. A jazz quartet played something slow and disjointed. And there were no chairs, just standing guests, each holding a drink, each looking slightly bewildered. She wore black, not navy, not plum, black, sharp-lined and unapologetic, with silver rings on every finger and a crown of thistles in her wild hair. Jackson wore a suit, but not the one his stylist chose. This one had history in the stitching, his grandfather's cufflinks, his mother's favorite tie pattern hidden in the lining. The vows weren't traditional. In fact, they weren't vows at all. "I won't promise to never make you furious," Indy said, voice strong, "or to always say the right thing, but I will promise to keep showing up, to keep trying, even when I don't feel like a fairy tale, especially then." Jackson's voice was softer. "I won't offer perfection, only honesty, only the version of me that's learning how to be more than the sum of his shadows. And I'll ask you to walk with me, not behind, not ahead, just beside." The guests didn't cry, they didn't cheer. They just watched, some confused, some spellbound, all feeling the weight of something real unfolding in front of them. When the officiant asked for rings, Indy pulled out a silver band etched with fire escape ladders. Jackson's ring was gold, dented slightly on one side, an imperfection she liked, said it felt like him. The kiss wasn't cinematic. It wasn't timed to music. It was rough, real, like two people trying to figure out where one ended and the other began. The applause came slow, unsure, but none of it mattered. They were married, not for the cameras, not for contracts, for something else entirely. Afterward, the reception blurred. Polaroids snapped. Indy danced barefoot. Jackson laughed, the kind of laugh that made people stop and look twice. And then, suddenly, it was late. The guests had thinned, the rooftop had quieted, and they were alone. Back in the penthouse, candles flickered like they were nervous. The bedroom was cleaner than usual. Someone from the staff had cleared the mess, folded the sheets down, arranged champagne in a silver bucket. Jackson walked in first, loosened his tie, kicked off his shoes. Indy followed slowly, fingers tracing the doorway like she was entering a museum exhibit. "So," he said, watching her carefully, "wedding night." She smiled. but there was something odd in it, something simmering just beneath. "Right," she said. "Wedding night." She walked to the dresser, pulled open a drawer, lifted the letter. "This is yours now." He hesitated. "You said not to open it until—" "We're married," she cut in. "We are." He took it from her. She turned away as he slid it open. Inside was a single photograph. It showed a younger Indy, maybe 19, maybe 20, standing in a cheap motel room, a black eye barely healing on her face. She wasn't crying, she wasn't posing, just there. Behind the photo, a note. "You should know what you married." His hands shook. She still wasn't looking at him. "I stayed with someone once," she said softly. "Too long. He didn't hit me often. Just enough that I forgot what it felt like to not flinch. I told myself I deserved it, because I'm complicated, because I'm loud, because I talk back." Jackson stared at the photo, the note, the woman now standing in front of him in a black wedding dress with armor behind her eyes. "I carried that. A version of myself, like a secret," she whispered. "Until today, until you." He looked up. "I'm not giving this to punish you," she said. "I'm giving it to warn you. I don't know how to be easy. I don't know how to be quiet, but I do know how to survive. I don't want easy," he said, throat tight. "I want you, all of it, even the bruised parts." She stepped closer, then closer still. "You sure?" she whispered. He kissed her, not like the ceremony, not like a show, but like someone seeing the truth and choosing it anyway. That night they didn't just sleep together, they slept together. And nothing about it felt like an ending, only the beginning of something that might finally be real. The morning after felt surreal. Sunlight cut across the room like soft blades, drawing golden lines over tangled sheets and bare skin. Indy stirred first, her fingers finding the ridges of Jackson's spine like she was reading a language only she understood. For a moment, everything was still. No noise, no tension, just breathing. And then the doorbell rang. 3 times. Fast. Urgent. Jackson groaned and buried his face into the pillow. "Ignore it." Indy laughed into his shoulder. "That's billionaire talk for someone's going to handle it." He reached for his phone, squinting. Dozens of alerts lit up the screen. Emails, headlines, messages from his PR director, flagged urgent. He sat up, blinked against the light and tapped the first headline. "Rebel bride's criminal past leaked day after wedding. Indy Stone's hidden arrest record raises questions." His heart stopped. Indy froze beside him. "What the hell is this?" she whispered. He scrolled, faster. The article was long, bloated with speculation and dramatic language. It detailed a shoplifting arrest from years ago, something minor, dismissed, sealed, but now splashed across national news as evidence of character. There were photos, a grainy mugshot, a video of her screaming at police taken out of context, twisted into something ugly. Jackson swore under his breath. Indy stood up, grabbing the phone from his hands. She stared at the screen, silent. He reached for her. "It's garbage. We'll handle it." "I told you," she said, voice shaking. "I told you exactly what this world would do to someone like me." He shook his head. "This isn't you. This is them, trying to control the narrative." "It is me," she shouted. "I did get arrested. I did scream. I wasn't a clean-cut debutante with a sob story tied in ribbons. I was messy, angry, surviving on caffeine and spite." She paced the room, breath shallow, knuckles white. "This was sealed," she whispered. "How the hell did they get it?" Jackson didn't answer, but his mind was racing. There were only a few teams with access to that level of background intel. Legal, obviously. Risk assessment firms. His private investigators from the prenup phase. His jaw clenched. "I'll find out who leaked it." "Don't bother," Indy muttered, tossing the phone on the bed. "Damage is done. They've already decided what kind of woman I am." "I haven't." She met his eyes, wounded and wary. "That's not always enough, Jackson. His phone buzzed again, this time a text from his father. "Should have done better due diligence. Your wife is a liability." He turned the phone, face down. Later that day, she locked herself in her studio. Paint slammed against canvas like war. Music blared, rage and distortion. When he knocked, she didn't answer. When he called, she didn't pick up. He held press calls alone, sat through damage control meetings with bloodshot eyes and frayed patience. The narrative spun quickly. Playboy Billionaire's impulsive bride, a PR disaster. Stock wavered. Stock wavered. Comment sections turned into venom pits. But behind the storm, something shifted inside Jackson. Not guilt, not shame, resolve. That night, he walked into the studio without knocking. She was on the floor, surrounded by canvases, clothes streaked, with paint, hands trembling. "I need to show you something," he said. She didn't look up. "If it's another article..." "It's not." He held out a folder, thin, cream-colored, familiar. She hesitated, then took it. Inside were 2 pages, a formal statement of liability and a withdrawal of all prior psychological assessments tied to her name. At the bottom, his signature. She looked up. "What is this?" "I fired the entire team responsible for the leak. Terminated every private investigator. This statement goes live tomorrow. It says I was the one who violated your privacy, that I take full responsibility. You're taking the fall. I should take the fall. What about your board? They'll scream. They'll threaten, but they can't remove me unless I hand over power, and I'm not doing that." She stared at him, eyes glassy, voice almost a whisper. "Why?" He crouched in front of her. "Because if loving you means losing everything else, I'll still come out ahead." Her lips parted, a sharp breath, a question unsaid. He leaned closer. "You said you don't know how to be easy. Good. Because easy never changed anything. You changed me." She dropped the folder, pulled him into her like gravity had a grip on her bones. And for the first time since the wedding, she cried, not from rage, not from fear, but from the terrifying beauty of being chosen, flaws, scars, fire, and all. Later that night, as they lay tangled in blankets, she whispered, "You're not who I thought you were. Better or worse?" She smiled against his chest. "Just real." He kissed her temple. "You have no idea how hard I've fought to be that." And neither of them said it aloud, but in the quiet hum of that moment, it was clear the war wasn't over. But for the first time, they were on the same side. By the end of the week, everything had changed. The official statement went public just as promised. Jackson's name was plastered across headlines, not for his fortune, not for his Playboy image, but for owning up to betraying the woman he loved. The media swirled with confusion. Billionaires didn't apologize, not like this, not with trembling honesty and press clips and no rehearsed charm to soften the blow. An indie? She watched the firestorm unfold with quiet disbelief. She'd expected backlash, expected her name to be dragged through mud, her art boycotted, her reputation drowned in clickbait. What she hadn't expected was the shift. People started talking, not in whispers, not with shame. Women shared stories, survivors wrote in, journalists, artists, even corporate wives posted about hidden bruises, about battles with rage and resilience, about the cost of being complicated in a world that wanted women to be palatable. Indy Stone, the problem girl, the punk bride, they started calling her something else, the truth teller. It didn't fix everything. It didn't erase the pain or the scars, but it did something deeper. It reminded her that she wasn't alone, and that maybe, just maybe, her mess had meaning. One night, Jackson found her in the kitchen, barefoot in an old band tee, spoon deep in a tub of peanut butter. "I think I accidentally started a feminist movement," she said with a mouthful. He laughed and leaned against the counter. "I think you intentionally lit a match, and now you're watching the whole industry burn." She grinned. "You mad? About it?" He kissed her forehead. "I'm mad I didn't do it first." They were learning how to live together, not just exist in shared space. The wedding buzz had dulled, the crisis faded into the background, and what remained was a strange, tender quiet, a stillness neither of them had ever really known. It wasn't always soft. They fought, often, about everything from press strategy to how much garlic belonged in pasta sauce. Sometimes she stormed out of rooms, sometimes he went cold and distant, but they always returned. Every argument ended with someone reaching for the other, even if it was just a brush of fingertips. In the dark, there was one night in particular. Rain battered the windows, the kind of storm that made the whole world feel suspended in water. Jackson had fallen asleep on the couch, laptop still open on his chest. Indy curled up beside him, rested her head near his ribs, and listened to the rhythm of him. She thought about the letter again, the photo, the version of herself she had buried so deep she'd forgotten how much power still pulsed in her bones. Gently, she reached up and shut the laptop. She whispered, "You should know. I didn't want to marry you at first." His eyes blinked, open, sleepy, curious. I thought you were too smooth, too calculated, but then you did something no one else ever did." "What?" "You stayed after I tried to scare you away." He touched her hair, tangled and damp with rain-slicked hair. "You think I scare that easy?" "I hoped you did," she whispered, "because if you didn't, I knew I'd fall." He smiled, just a little. "Then I'm glad I stayed stubborn." The next morning, she called her agent and canceled a show, not out of fear, but because she wanted to create on her own terms again. No curated rage, no art made to please collectors, just truth. Jackson, in turn, resigned from the board of one of his own companies, a public gesture to show he meant it when he said his rules were changing. The tabloids turned to newer scandals. Their story, once headlined gold, faded from the top rows. And they didn't chase the spotlight anymore. They just lived. A few weeks later, they went away for the weekend. Just the two of them. No entourage, no photographers. A lakeside cabin tucked deep in pine trees, barely any signal, no mirrors. Taller than a shoebox. Jackson built a fire, badly. Indy laughed and took over. They made burnt marshmallows, played records that skipped, argued over who cheated at Monopoly, made love on a scratchy wool blanket and didn't care. And in that quiet cabin, with no designer, suits or press schedules or contracts hanging over them, Indy rolled over in bed one morning and whispered, "You know what the surprise really was?" Jackson, half asleep, raised an eyebrow. "Our wedding night. You know what I gave you?" He looked over at her, searching. "Your past?" "No," she said softly. "I gave you trust." He blinked, sat up slowly. Her words hung in, the air like candle smoke. "That night," she said, "was the first time in years I didn't sleep with one eye open." He reached for her hand, held it. She squeezed. No more needed to be said. They were no longer playing a part. They were building something real, out of broken pieces, stitched together with choice after choice after choice. And somehow, it was working. Spring arrived without permission. One morning, the city woke up and it was warm again. Sunlight splashed across sidewalks, cherry blossoms bled onto the streets, and Indy left the windows open in every room. The scent of jasmine drifted into the penthouse, and Jackson, coffee in hand, swore he could hear her humming in the next room. It had been 3 months since the wedding. 3 months since her past broke the internet and his empire took a hit. But in that time, something unshakable had formed between them, something not even either of them could name. It wasn't peace. It wasn't romance in the way people usually meant it. It was knowing how the other laughed when they were exhausted, knowing which foods triggered old memories, knowing which words to avoid during an argument and which ones to say like lifelines. Indy stood in the studio one morning, covered in streaks of yellow paint, staring at a half-finished canvas. It was messy, chaotic, wild with unfinished edges, and she loved it. She turned to Jackson, who had wandered in with a half-eaten bagel in one hand. "Does it make sense to you?" she asked, gesturing toward the mess. He studied it for a long moment, then nodded. "Yeah, it looks like healing." She blinked, then smiled. "You always know what to say. Only to you." They were planning a small dinner that week. Close friends, a few family members, nothing extravagant. It was supposed to be the post-wedding celebration the tabloids didn't get to see. No photographers, no sponsors, just warmth. Indy called it their second first impression. When the guests arrived, the apartment was filled with laughter and the clink of glasses. Warm light reflected off the floor-to-ceiling windows, the skyline shimmering like a velvet curtain beyond the glass. Jackson gave a short speech. It wasn't rehearsed. He spoke about the mess of love, the rawness of building something that didn't follow rules, and how Indy had taught him to be uncomfortable in the best way. "She doesn't tame storms," he said, eyes locked on her. "She teaches them how to dance." The room fell silent for a beat. Then someone raised a glass. To Indy, not as the billionaire's bride, but as herself. After the guests left, Jackson lingered in the doorway of her studio. The painting had changed. Now, a silhouette stood at the center, half in shadow, half lit by wild streaks of color. It was raw, unfinished, honest. "Is that me?" he asked. Indy leaned against the wall. "No, that's us." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was reverent. That night, as they washed dishes together, her in rubber gloves, him humming Sinatra off-key, Indy froze mid-motion. She looked down, then slowly lifted her hand from the soapy water, revealing a thin red mark across her finger. "Damn it," she muttered, inspecting the tiny cut. Jackson reached for her hand immediately. "Let me see." "It's nothing, just caught it on a glass edge." But he was already gently drying her hand with a towel, cradling it like it was more than just skin. She stared at him, and out of nowhere the memory came flooding back of the first time she bled in front of someone who didn't care, of how different this was. "I never thought I'd feel safe like this," she said softly. He paused. "Even now?" She nodded. "Especially now." She leaned into him, and for a long moment neither of them said anything. Then Jackson broke the silence with a grin. "You know what we should do?" "What?" "Leave the city." Indy raised an eyebrow. "For good?" "No," he said. "Just for a while. Reset. No headlines, no board meetings, no expectations." She considered it, then shrugged. "All right. Where?" He smiled. "Anywhere you can breathe." She looked out the window where the city pulsed below. And for the first time, she didn't feel like she had something to prove to it anymore. "Let's go tomorrow," she said. They packed light, only one suitcase each, and the next morning, before the sun was fully up, they left the penthouse behind. No driver, no press release, just a road trip playlist, and a crumpled map Indy insisted on using instead of GPS. As the skyline faded in the rearview mirror, she reached over and placed her hand on his knee. "You scared?" she asked. He shook his head. "Only of how good this feels." They didn't have a plan, didn't need one, because for the first time, their story wasn't being written for anyone else. It was theirs. No edits, no spin, just two broken people choosing each other. Every mile, every hour, every heartbeat, they drove for hours. No destination, no time limit, just empty roads, flickering gas station lights, and the kind of quiet that makes you feel like the world forgot how to rush. Indy had her bare feet up on the dashboard, a thrift store hoodie wrapped around her, shoulders, and a toothpick between her teeth, like some kind of outlaws in love cliché. Jackson had never looked so relaxed. One hand on the wheel, the other resting loosely on her leg. They stopped at a roadside diner around midnight. One of those places with cracked vinyl booths and jukeboxes that ate your quarters. They ordered pancakes and black coffee, and the waitress called them Sweetheart and Darling, like they were characters in her favorite soap opera. Indy left a $50 tip just because the woman reminded her of her aunt. Back in the car, the heater rattled. Jackson glanced at her, voice low. "Do you miss it?" "The chaos?" He nodded. She was quiet for a moment, staring out the window at a stretch of dark pine trees. "No," she said, "I miss the noise sometimes, but not the silence that came afterward. That kind of loneliness, it echoed. This..." She gestured around. "The car. This feels different, like quiet with a heartbeat." They pulled into a roadside motel around 2 a.m. The sign buzzed with flickering neon. "Rest easy." He paid in cash. She grabbed the keys. The room was awful in the way only roadside motels could be. Floral comforter, wood paneling, a soap bar the size of a thumb. But Indy threw herself onto the bed like it was a 5-star suite, laughing into the pillows, limbs sprawling everywhere. Jackson watched her, smiling. "Come on," she said, patting the space beside her. He joined her. They lay there in the dark, no words, just breathing. "I'm scared," she admitted after a while. "Not of you, not of us, but of being happy." He turned toward her. "Why?" "Because the last time I felt like this, everything got taken away." He nodded, as if he understood that kind of grief. "You know what I'm scared of?" "What?" "That I'll mess this up. That some old habit, some part of me that used to play the game too well, will come back and ruin it." She looked at him, eyes glassy in the dim motel light. "Then let's promise each other something. Anything. Let's mess up," she said. "Let's screw things up, but together. Let's not run when it gets ugly." His breath caught. Then he whispered, "Deal." The next morning they drove again, through hills that rolled like waves, past barns and broken fences and clouds that looked painted in place. Indy started sketching in the passenger seat, just loose, fast lines on a pad she'd stuffed in her bag last minute. She handed him one by the time they hit their third small town. It was him. Messy hair, seatbelt across his chest, a half-smile that only came out when he thought no one was looking. "This is how I see you," she said softly. He studied the drawing. "I look gentle." She smiled. "You are." They stayed in that town for 2 nights. Walked barefoot in a creek, ate pie from a woman named Mabel. Slept in a bed that squeaked every time they shifted, but neither of them cared. It was the opposite of everything they were supposed to want, and exactly what they needed. On the 3rd morning, Jackson stood in front of a mirror, shaving with a disposable razor from the corner store. Indy watched him from bed, chin propped on her palm. "You'd give all this up, wouldn't you?" she asked. He paused. "The city?" "No," she said, "the power." He turned to her, eyes thoughtful. "I already have." "Not really. Not yet." He put down the razor. "You thinking about going back?" he asked. She shook her head. "Not the same way. I want to make things again, but for me, not to prove anything, not to spite anyone." He walked over to her, sat at the edge of the bed. "Then maybe we both start over." "Clean slate?" He nodded. "We'll keep the fire, just toss the maps." She leaned forward and kissed his temple. "You really would burn the whole empire down, wouldn't you? If you lit the match," he said, smiling. That night they danced in a parking lot under string lights from a closed taco truck. No music, just Indy humming some old tune she remembered from her childhood. Barefoot on warm concrete, arms wrapped around a man she never thought she'd trust. And that's when it hit her. This wasn't the surprise. The real twist wasn't her wedding night, or the scandal, or even falling in love with someone like him. The real surprise was that she felt safe, loved without conditions, held without fear, chosen every damn day. That kind of thing didn't just happen. You fought for it. And that night, as they lay in the backseat of the car watching stars blink awake, Indy whispered something into the dark that made Jackson's heart stop. "I think I want a future." He didn't ask what kind. He just whispered back, "Then I'll build it with you." And this time, she believed him. Not because he had money, not because he made promises, but because he stayed. In every moment, every mile, every storm. And finally, so did she. They came back changed. Not in the way people expected. They didn't return with matching tattoos or ring renewal selfies on the beach. They didn't even talk about the trip to anyone. But something inside them had softened. And that softness, rare and unspoken, became the scaffolding for everything. That came next. The penthouse felt too big now, too quiet, too performative, with its curated furniture and automatic blinds that rose with the sun like some cinematic cue. Indy looked around one morning and said, "This place feels like it belongs to the man you used to be." Jackson didn't flinch. "Then let's find the one that belongs to us." They sold the place by the end of the month, moved into a brownstone in Brooklyn. Smaller, older, full of quirks. The pipes moaned when the water ran, the floorboards creaked, and the windows needed coaxing to close during storms. But it was real. They painted the kitchen together, argued over wallpaper, hosted Sunday dinners with folding chairs and vinyl records that crackled like they were alive. Jackson traded his tailored suits for worn-in denim and loose Henleys. Indy wore her paint-stained jeans everywhere. No more gala gowns unless she wanted to. No more red carpet photo ops unless they meant something. She reopened her studio, on her terms this time. One room, white walls, no sponsorships, just canvases and chaos and something close to peace. People came, not for spectacle, but for the story, for the truth. One of her first new pieces was titled, "Still Standing," the silhouette of a woman in flames, but smiling. Jackson, meanwhile, started funding community tech programs. Quietly, anonymously. He didn't need the credit anymore. He just wanted to use his empire for something other than expanding it. He still ran his companies, but something had shifted. Less ruthlessness, more intention. The people around him noticed. His assistant once whispered to Indy, "He smiles more now, like real smiles." "You did that." But Indy shook her head. He chose that. They built routines, late-night walks to the bodega for ice cream, movie marathons in pajamas, reading books aloud, switching accents for fun. They had their blow-ups, sure. Passion didn't leave just because pain had quieted. But now, every fight ended in the same place, understanding and laughter. Always eventually laughter. One night, as the city hummed outside their windows, Indy sat in bed sketching. She looked up and said, "Do you ever think about kids?" Jackson blinked. "Sometimes." She hesitated. "I'm not saying I'm ready. I'm not even sure I want them. But I wonder." He reached over, brushing a loose curl behind her ear. "We don't have to know everything right now. All I care about is that whatever life we build it awake, not just going through the motions." She stared at him. That's what it was. Not love, not lust, not even redemption. Awareness. The kind that came from surviving the worst and still choosing to be present. "I was never frozen," she said softly. "What?" "On our wedding night. You thought I froze when I gave you that letter. But I didn't." "Then what was it?" "I was waking up," she whispered, "for the first time in years." He leaned in, kissed her slow. "Then I'm glad I was there when you did." The next morning, she opened the old box, the one she had hidden for years. The photo was still there, and the letter she never sent back. She read it one last time, let the words sting, let the pain breathe. Then she folded it all back up and burned it in a small tin dish outside on the fire. Escape. Jackson watched her through the window. She didn't cry. She just watched the smoke drift upward, then turned and came back inside. And somehow everything felt lighter. Months passed. Their rhythm deepened, their foundation rooted. It wasn't perfect. That wasn't the goal anymore, but it was true. And one evening, Jackson came home with something in his hand. A small black box. Indy narrowed her eyes. "If that's jewelry, I'm going to scream," he grinned. "It's not." He opened it. Inside was a tiny silver key. To what? He pulled out a folded brochure. Stone Hollow. A cabin. In the mountains. The same one they'd stayed in all those months ago. But this time, it was theirs. "I bought it," he said. "Figured we should always have a place to run to when the city gets too loud." She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she stood on her tiptoes, kissed him hard and whispered, "You keep surprising me." He looked at her, eyes steady. "That's the plan." And just like that, the man who once lived for power and the woman who once fought the world alone stepped into a new kind of unknown, one filled with stillness, freedom, and the kind of intimacy that didn't need permission. They weren't rebuilding what was broken. They were making something new entirely together. The day they went back to the cabin, it was raining. Soft, misty rain that blurred the trees and made the world feel like it was holding its breath. Indy sat in the passenger seat, her fingers trailing shapes on the fogged window. Jackson had the heat on low and a playlist of acoustic covers playing. In the background, neither of them said much on the drive, but it wasn't silence born of tension. It was the kind that held comfort, the kind that felt like home. They arrived just before dusk. The cabin looked the same, weathered wood, green roof, that little wind chime still dancing under the eave like nothing had changed. But now, it was theirs. They unpacked slowly, neither rushing. The rain made everything slower, softer. Inside, Indy lit the fire while Jackson unpacked food into the tiny fridge. She moved with a familiarity that made his chest ache, not just because she belonged there, but because he did too. Later, they curled up on the old couch under a heavy quilt, watching the flames flicker. Indy spoke first. "I used to think love would save me." Jackson turned to her. She continued, "Like some knight would show up with answers, or a map, or even just arms strong enough to carry the weight I'd been holding. But I've learned that love doesn't rescue, it chooses. Again and again," he nodded, "and sometimes it just sits with you, in the dark, quietly." She rested her head on his shoulder. "I think that's the kind I needed all along." The fire crackled. "I'm not afraid anymore," she said. "Not of being seen, not of being soft, not even of breaking again." Jackson kissed her forehead. "Then you're stronger than you've ever been." The next morning, the sun pushed through the mist like forgiveness. They walked the old trail behind the cabin, past the mossy stones and the wildflowers pushing up through frostbitten soil. Indy stopped at the same place she had, the first time, by the overlook that stretched endlessly into the valley. She closed her eyes, breathed deep. Jackson watched her. She opened them again. "I have an idea," he smiled. "Should I be worried?" She turned to him, eyes bright. "Let's build something." "Here?" "Yes. A studio for me. Maybe a little greenhouse for you, since you kill every houseplant we own." He laughed. "Hey, that one fern's still alive." "That's fake, Jackson," he mock-gasped. "Well then, absolutely, we build." And so they did. Over the next weeks, they cleared space behind the cabin, dug, hauled wood, designed everything together, arguing over windows, laughing about paint colors, pausing every now and then just to kiss like they'd only just met. Neighbors stopped by, small town folk with easy smiles and helpful hands. One old man with sun-leathered skin looked at Indy and said, "You don't look like you're from around here." She grinned. "Not yet, but I will be." At night, they soaked in the clawfoot tub they'd found abandoned in a junk shop, drank wine under a blanket of stars so vast it made them both ache. And somewhere in the stillness, Indy began to sketch. Something new, something she couldn't quite explain. It was a house, simple, surrounded by trees, and inside, two figures. A woman with paint on her hands, a man holding a book. Between them, a child curled on a rug, asleep. She showed it to Jackson without saying a word. He stared at it for a long time, then slowly looked up. "Are you trying to tell me something?" She hesitated. "I don't know yet. Maybe I'm telling myself that it's possible, that I'm allowed to want that." He didn't pressure her, didn't make it a promise, just held her hand in the silence that followed. That spring, the studio was finished. A big window faced the east, catching sunrise like it was a gift. Indy moved her easel in first, then her paints, then the jar of brushes she once thought she'd never use again. Jackson stood in the doorway that first morning, coffee in hand, watching her work. "You look alive in here," she smiled without turning. "I am." And then, one evening, months later, when the wildflowers returned and the air smelled like earth waking up, she sat beside him on the porch and said, "I'm late." He turned to her. She was already looking at him, wide-eyed and calm. "I took the test twice." He didn't speak. His chest rose, then fell, and slowly the silence turned to tears. Not fear, not panic. Joy. Pure and shaking joy. "I'm scared," she whispered. He pulled her close. "So am I," he said. "But I want this, with you. Only you." She nodded, then buried her face in his neck. And the sky above them seemed to crack open with gold. That night, they lay in bed and whispered to the ceiling, not about names, not about diapers or schools or how they tell people, but about belonging. How maybe the wildest thing of all wasn't the scandal or the escape, the fire or the fame, but how two people who thought they were broken had found a way to begin. Not over, not again, just begin. From scratch, from love, from trust that had been earned in bruises and healed in touch. And in that cabin, under a patchwork quilt and the soft rise of Indy's breath against his chest, Jackson whispered the thing that had been sitting in his heart since the very first night they met. "You never froze." And she whispered back, "Neither did you." They didn't announce the pregnancy. There were no Instagram reveals or glossy magazine spreads, no interviews, no pink or blue balloon photo shoots. Just a quiet evolution. Her jeans no longer buttoning, his hands resting on her belly when they lay together, her laugh growing a little softer, a little rounder. Their lives didn't explode with drama. They settled into something far more, revolutionary, peace. The first time Indy felt the baby move, she was standing barefoot in the studio painting. It was just a flutter, like wings brushing the inside of her. She gasped, dropped the brush, placed her hands gently against herself. Jackson ran in, paint still on his fingers, panic in his voice. "Are you okay?" She looked up at him with tears in her eyes and whispered, "They kicked." He knelt, pressed his ear to her belly and waited. Then, again, a small thud, as if the universe itself was answering. He kissed her stomach, then her hand, then her mouth. And in that moment, they both knew. No matter what came next, they had already built the safest place they'd ever known. The months that followed were ordinary in all the best ways. Cravings at midnight, peanut butter and pickles, ultrasound appointments where they held hands too tightly, arguments about crib placement and baby names. Jackson was partial to old Hollywood. Indy preferred nature-inspired. "We're not naming our kid River," he'd grumble. "It's not a dog, Indy." She'd laugh. "Better than naming him Clark." But under every decision, every silly fight, every quiet fear was love. Unshakable, proven in battle love. When Indy finally went into labor, it wasn't dramatic. No panicked rushing, no movie scene chaos. It happened at dawn. She felt the first contraction while drinking tea on the porch. Looked over at Jackson, who was half asleep in the rocker beside her. "I think it's time." He shot up. "Now?" She smiled. "Yeah, let's go meet them." They drove to the local hospital in silence. Fingers intertwined, breaths steady. The birth was hard, raw, real, no makeup, no edits, just sweat and screams and tears. Jackson never left her side, not even for a second. He whispered to her through every wave of pain, his forehead pressed to hers, reminding her she wasn't alone. When their child finally entered the world, the room went quiet. Not because the baby didn't cry. They did, loud and furious. But because something sacred had happened, a cycle had broken, a line of silence and survival and pretending had shattered, and in its place, new life. Jackson held them first, shaking hands, eyes full of tears, then handed them to Indy, who cradled the baby against her chest, like she'd been waiting her whole life for that single heartbeat. They named them Sage, not because it was trendy, but because it meant wisdom. Because they hoped this child would grow up knowing that strength wasn't in armor or in money, but in truth, in choosing softness, in choosing people. Their first night home, the three of them curled up in the bed at the cabin, baby on Indy's chest, Jackson's arms around them both. No words, just breath, just skin and heat and the sound of the forest outside. Weeks passed, seasons turned. Jackson took leave from his company, unthinkable to the version of him who once saw vacation as weakness. Indy stopped painting for a while, not out of loss, but because she wanted every second of these newborn days, every coo, every yawn, every impossibly tiny sock. Their world grew small, then expansive in ways they never saw coming. They danced in the kitchen to no music, took turns reading bedtime stories before the baby could even understand the words, whispered their fears and joys across the dark, never letting a single feeling go unspoken. And sometimes, in the stillest hours of the night, Indy would watch them both sleep and wonder, how did a girl who once ran from everything end up here? With a man who met her fire with patience, with a child who looked at her like the sky started in her eyes, with a life that didn't just survive the chaos, but bloomed from it. One day, years from now, she'd tell Sage the story. Not about tabloids or scandals or secrets, but about strength, about choosing not to settle, about the boy with power and the girl with scars, and how together they made something not perfect, but real. And in the last light of one golden evening, Jackson turned to her and said, "You know, I used to think you were the wild one." She smiled. "I am." He grinned. "But you made me wilder." And they laughed. God, they laughed. While Sage chased fireflies in the tall grass, and the trees whispered stories only they would ever truly understand. Not the world's version, theirs. And so, the story doesn't end with a climax, or a scandal, or a dramatic twist. It ends here, softly, with quiet love and weathered hands holding each other in the dark, with the ache of past pain slowly being outshined by the rhythm of laughter echoing through a home that was built with more heart than brick. There's something sacred about lives like these. Not perfect, not polished, but deeply lived, where the scars don't disappear, but they stop aching, and sometimes even shine. Jackson and Indy weren't trying to be anyone's example. They were just two people who met at the crossroads of ruin and hope and decided to walk forward together anyway. It wasn't easy. It never is. But they chose each other, again and again, and somewhere in all those choices, a life emerged that neither of them could have imagined. The fire faded into embers. The noise of the past dimmed like the last note of a song you forgot you loved. And in its place, peace, home, and the sound of a child's laughter, free, unburdened, new. So maybe love doesn't always arrive the way we think it will. Maybe it's not a rescue, but a mirror. Not a fix, but a foundation. Maybe the most powerful kind of love is the one that lets us become who we were always meant to be. And if you've made it this far, maybe you're carrying your own kind of fire too. something rebellious, something raw, something true. Let it burn gently. Let it guide you home.